Animal experiments have played a vital role in the evolution of science for centuries, but some experiments are unimaginably cruel. Let's start with number 8, head transplants. Yep, that is exactly what it sounds like. The 1950s were a crazy time, and it's not just because clothing items had questionable names like bullet bras and wiggle skirts. In 1954, Vladimir Demikov, a Soviet surgeon who was known for his work to improve coronary bypass surgery, decided to do something bizarre. He began conducting experiments that involved attaching one dog's head and upper body parts, including the front legs, onto another dog. I told you, it was exactly what it sounded like. The whole point of the experiment was to focus on providing blood supply to the donor's head and upper body. The really crazy part of this very crazy experiment is that the dogs generally managed to live on a few days after the procedure. One even survived 29 days. Eventually, the animals died due to transplant rejection. You would think the animals dying would be enough to stop Demikov from repeating the procedure, but nope, he kept it up for over 5 years. After Demikov passed, a man named Robert White began to carry out head transplants on monkeys because he was inspired by Demikov's work. Number 7. The dark side of turkey mating. When a group of scientists set out to examine the sex lives of turkeys, you just know it's not going to end well. In the 1960s, 2 scientists at Pennsylvania State University, Dr. Martin Shine and Dr. Edward Hale, decided to carry out a very grim experiment. They were trying to find out more about what exactly gets male turkeys going. Now, previous experiments already proved that male turkeys don't have standards and would try to get it on with just about any living thing, even humans under the right circumstances. But this experiment was much darker. It involved killing a female turkey and preparing it to look as alive as possible. Just in case you weren't paying attention in biology class, the preparation process is called taxidermy. The taxidermied female turkeys were presented to the male turkeys, and let's just say the males weren't put off by the females showing absolutely no signs of life. Next, the scientists began to take out parts of the taxidermied turkeys to see how the males would react. They took away the feet and then the wings, but the response remained the same. Finally, the turkey was down to a head on a stick, and surprise, surprise, the males still initiated mating. Number 6. Psychologically tortured monkeys. A bunch of scientists in China dedicated themselves to studying and potentially finding treatments for mental illnesses ranging from anxiety to schizophrenia. Sounds like a good cause, right? Here's the thing. To adequately study an illness, a test subject is needed. And since they couldn't exactly pick people with mental illnesses off the streets, a group of innocent monkeys entered the mix. The experimenters genetically manipulated the monkeys so that they'd be plagued with multiple mental health disorders, ranging from anxiety and fear to depression and schizophrenia. Some of the monkeys were genetically modified to suffer from sleep disorders. This already sounds like a nightmare, but the scientists weren't done just yet. They selected one monkey out of the group that exhibited the correct gene editing and most severe disease phenotypes and proceeded to clone it. The cloning was successful, and 5 monkeys were born with genes that made them very likely to experience psychological distress in its most extreme forms. At the time this evil experiment was carried out, China was said to be the only country with the technology to clone a primate. Number 5. The dog dental experiment. This next experiment is the stuff of nightmares, and it's truly disheartening that it involves man's best friend. Scientists at the Gothenburg University in Sweden set out to study how dental implants cause inflammation and bone degradation. To aid the study, the scientists decided to use dogs as test subjects. Apparently, dog saliva and mouth bacteria closely resemble that of humans, and the surgical procedure is also quite similar. 6 young Labradors were selected, and that's when the terror began. About 35% of the dog's perfectly healthy teeth were taken out and replaced with implants. This means the poor animals had to go through multiple painful operations. When news of the experiment became public, animal lovers worldwide were enraged. Different protests and petitions were started to save the dogs, but it all turned out to be for nothing, because the researchers at Gothenburg University went ahead with the next phase of their plan. They killed all 6 dogs, even though they were perfectly healthy, and extracted parts of their jaws to further the research. Number 4. Cosmetic testing. The 1940s were a crazy time with World War II and the beginning of the Cold War. What many people don't know is that rabbits didn't have it any easier. In the 1940s, it became popular to use rabbits to test out cosmetic products, and it wasn't just lipstick. The poor animals were taken from their natural habitat and forced to endure many cruel tests, the most common of which were eye and skin irritation tests. The rabbits would be held down in full body restraints, and then chemicals would be dropped onto their eyes or spread on their exposed skin. In extreme cases, the rabbit's reaction to the products would yield results like bleeding, blindness, and ulcers. The reason why rabbits were chosen for the experiments is almost as cruel as the experiments themselves. You see, rabbits don't have tear ducts, which means they can't cry out chemicals in their eyes. This in turn means that the rabbit's reaction can be observed for longer. Today, many high-end cosmetic brands are committed to staying cruelty-free. And so, with any luck, the days of carrying out cosmetic tests on animals are gradually coming to an end. Number 3. Venom injections. This is another one of those experiments that is as horrible as the name suggests. And this time, it involves cruelty to not one, but 2 animal species. According to statistics released by the World Health Organization, about 5.4 million people are bitten by snakes every year, and this results in anywhere between 83,000 to 138,000 deaths. Scientists in Costa Rica decided to take matters into their own hands and create antibodies that can be used to treat humans who have been bitten by snakes. The scientists began breeding snakes in captivity for the sole purpose of extracting their lethal venom. Once the venom is extracted, the next phase begins. In the next phase, the extracted venom is injected into horses in small doses, not enough to kill the animal, but certainly enough to cause unimaginable pain. The injected horses fall ill, begin to lose weight, and in some cases, become anemic. The whole point of the experiment is for the horses to start producing antibodies, and immediately that happens. The antibodies are extracted, processed, and sold as antivenom. Number 2. Pregnancy diet tests. The scientists at the Oregon National Primate Research Center decided to carry out a study to find out how a pregnant mother's diet may affect her offspring. This experiment turned out to be one of the most cruel ones in human history. Since experimenting on humans is off the table, the scientists settled for the next best thing, a group of perfectly healthy female monkeys. They proceeded to feed the monkeys a questionable high-fat diet for a prolonged period of time. And surprise, surprise, this resulted in many of the monkeys becoming obese. Kind of like what would happen if you decided to live on just burgers for a long time. So maybe don't do that. Satisfied with their work so far, the scientists moved on to the next phase. They inseminated the now obese monkeys. And this is where things really got ugly. Some of the pregnant monkeys were killed and cut open, so their brains and fetuses could be extracted and examined. The monkeys that were kept alive until they gave birth didn't fare much better because their newborns were taken away from them almost immediately for the same purpose of being studied. Some sources report that the babies kept alive were eventually killed when they were about 13 months old. Number 1. Rodent forced swim test. Quick, picture a group of scientists. I bet you thought about a bunch of people wearing lab coats, working with chemicals. What you didn't think about is 5 or 6 people gathering together to watch a rodent in a tiny container fight for its life. As the name implies, the rodent forced swim test involves placing a rodent in a container of lukewarm water it can't escape and giving it 2 options: swim or drown. Being in danger of drowning forces the animal's survival instincts to kick in, and it begins to fight to keep its nose above water. The sides of the container are slippery, and so after a while, the rodent gives in and begins to simply float. Since rodents have nervous systems similar to our own and can feel pain, fear, loneliness, and joy, this little guy is most likely filled with fear throughout the process. Now, you're probably wondering what scientists stand to gain from torturing rodents. You see, the rodent forced swim test is used to test the antidepressant potential of new drugs used to treat, well, depression. The scientists take record of the duration of time that the rodent is active. They also record the time that it spends floating before finally being removed from the container. This data is somehow used to indicate antidepressant activity. If you're trying to find comfort in the fact that the information obtained from the experiment is useful in helping humans, I hate to break it to you, but according to research by the People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals organization, that is not the case. PETA believes that the information obtained tells us nothing about human depression, and next to nothing about which drugs will successfully treat it. So that sucks. That's it for today's video. See you in the next one.